crackling sound woke me up. At first I thought it was just a bad dream, but when I opened my eyes I saw the faint glow of orange light creeping through the gaps in the door. Something wasn't right. My heart pounded as I stumbled out of bed, barefoot on the cold floor, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when the smell hit me. Smoke. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. After a long day of work, I had fallen into bed exhausted, my mind already preparing for the tasks of the next morning. The familiar comfort of my small room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, and the faint scent of freshly washed sheets had lulled me into a deep sleep. Everything seemed so peaceful until that moment. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the flickering glow beneath the door became more pronounced, and the acrid scent of burning wood filled my nostrils. Panic gripped my chest. The air felt thicker now, harder to breathe. Something was very, very wrong. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My fingers fumbled in the dim light, but I managed to unlock it. No messages, no calls. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but who would I call? And what would I say? I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Then I realized there was no time for hesitation. "Mom! Dad!" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. The silence only amplified my growing fear. I pushed the door open, and that's when I saw it. Thick, dark smoke swirling in the hallway, illuminated by the ominous glow of flames from the living room. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that it drowned out every other sound. Barefoot, I stepped into the hallway, the cold tiles sending a jolt through my body. Each step felt heavier than the last. The smoke was everywhere, stinging my eyes and making it hard to see. I coughed, trying to catch my breath, but the air felt like it was coated in ash. The crackling of fire grew louder, more menacing. I could feel the heat intensifying, pressing against my skin, urging me to move faster. I glanced towards the living room, and my worst fears were confirmed. Flames danced wildly, devouring everything in their path. The furniture, the curtains, the pictures on the walls, all reduced to nothing but fuel for the relentless fire. A wave of helplessness washed over me. This was my home, my life, and it was all slipping away in front of my eyes. "Mom, Dad, where are you?" I shouted again, desperation creeping into my voice. Still no answer. I couldn't stand still any longer. I needed to act, to find my family, to get us all out before it was too late. The fire wasn't just destroying our house, it was threatening our very lives. Every second counted, and I knew that if I didn't move quickly, we wouldn't have a chance. I took a deep breath, despite the suffocating smoke, and forced myself forward. This was only the beginning, and I had no choice but to face it head on. The hallway felt endless, like a tunnel with no way out. Every step forward was a struggle against the thickening smoke and searing heat. My eyes burned, and my throat felt raw from the acrid air. I kept moving, one hand on the wall for balance, the other shielding my mouth in a desperate attempt to breathe. "Mom! Dad!" I shouted again, my voice hoarse and barely audible over the roar of the flames. A faint cough answered me from the other end of the hallway. My heart leaped. They were still inside, still alive. Fueled by hope and adrenaline, I pushed forward, ignoring the stinging pain in my lungs. As I turned the corner, I saw them, my parents, huddled near the back door, struggling to stay low to avoid the worst of the smoke. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The path to them was partially blocked by a fallen beam, its edges glowing red-hot. Flames licked at the walls, closing in around us. "We have to move, now!" I yelled, trying to stay calm despite the chaos. I could see the fear in their eyes, mirroring my own. There was no time for hesitation. We had only seconds before the fire would consume everything. I scanned the room, my mind racing for a solution. The front door was out of the question. Flames had already engulfed that side of the house. The windows were too high and too small to climb through. The only option was the back door, just a few feet away, but the fallen beam stood between us and safety. "Stay low and follow me," I instructed, my voice firm despite the panic clawing at my chest. I crouched down and moved towards the beam, using my jacket to shield my hands from the heat. It was heavier than I expected, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't be able to lift it. "Help me!" I called out, and my dad rushed over. Together we managed to push the beam aside just enough to create a narrow passage. The heat was intense, and the smoke made it hard to see, but we had no other choice. "Go!" I urged, and my mom crawled through the gap, followed closely by my dad. I was the last to go, squeezing through just as the flames closed in behind us. The heat was unbearable, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't make it, but then we were outside. The cool night air hit me like a wave, and I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath. My parents were beside me, coughing and shaken, but alive. We had made it out, barely. I looked back at the house, now fully engulfed in flames. Everything we owned, every memory we had built within those walls, was being reduced to ashes before our eyes. A mixture of relief and sorrow washed over me. We had escaped with our lives, but at a great cost. For a moment none of us spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant wail of approaching sirens. We were safe, but we were also homeless, and the weight of that reality began to sink in. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a faint light over the smouldering remains of what once was our home. The fire was mostly out now, but smoke still rose in thin wisps from the blackened ruins. What had taken years to build had been destroyed in mere minutes. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago we had gone to bed thinking it was just another normal night. I stood there shivering in the cool dawn air, wrapped in a thin blanket that one of our neighbours had given me. My parents were beside me, silent and lost in their own thoughts. None of us knew what to say. What could we say? Everything we had worked for, every memory we had cherished, was gone. As I looked at the charred remains, I remembered all the moments that house had held. Birthday parties, quiet Sunday mornings, late-night conversations by the fireplace. Each memory felt like a stab to the heart, a reminder of what we had lost. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming, overwhelming me with a wave of grief. A firefighter approached us, his face weary but kind. "We managed to contain it before it spread to the other houses," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss. If there's anything you need, let us know." I nodded, unable to find my voice. What could they possibly do? The fire had taken everything, our clothes, our belongings, even the small trinkets that held sentimental value. All we had now were the clothes on our backs and each other. "We'll be okay," my dad said quietly, though his voice wavered. I wasn't sure if he was trying to convince us or himself. My mum gave him a small, tired smile, but I could see the tears in her eyes. We were alive, and that was something to be grateful for. But the road ahead felt uncertain and daunting. Neighbours began to gather around us, offering words of comfort and small gestures of kindness. A cup of hot tea, a warm coat, a place to stay for the night. Their generosity was overwhelming, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we weren't as alone as I had thought. Despite the loss, there was something about that moment that stayed with me. The realization that while the fire had taken our home, it hadn't taken our spirit. We were still standing, still breathing, still together, and as long as we had each other, we could find a way to rebuild. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. The future was uncertain and the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time since the fire had started, I felt something other than fear. I felt a quiet determination. We had lost our home, but we hadn't lost ourselves. And that meant we could start over, no matter how long it took. The hours that followed were a blur of movement and emotion. Kind neighbours continued to come by, offering food, clothes, and warm words of encouragement. It was strange. Only hours ago, we had been surrounded by the familiar walls of our home, and now we stood on the same street as strangers in need. Despite everything, I felt a strange sense of gratitude for the people around us. Later that morning, we were taken to a temporary shelter arranged by the local community centre. The space was simple, just a large hall with rows of cots, but it felt like a refuge after the chaos we had endured. Volunteers moved around, handing out blankets and serving hot soup. The warmth of the meal brought some comfort, though it couldn't ease the ache of what we had lost. As we sat together, my mum whispered, "We have to stay strong." Her voice was quiet but resolute. She reached out and held my hand tightly, as if drawing strength from the connection. My dad, who had been staring into space, gave a small nod. "We'll rebuild," he said, though his eyes betrayed the uncertainty he felt. I didn't know what the future held, but at that moment I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let this fire define us. We had survived, and that meant we had a chance to start over. It wouldn't be easy. There would be struggles, setbacks, and moments of despair. But as long as we had each other, we could find a way forward. Over the next few days, we began to take small steps toward recovery. Donations from the community helped us gather basic necessities: clothes, toiletries, and food. The local news covered our story, and more people reached out to offer help. Their kindness was a beacon of hope in a time of darkness. One morning, while sifting through the few items we had salvaged from the ruins, I found something that brought a smile to my face: a half-burned family photo. The edges were charred and the colours had faded, but the image was still clear enough to see our faces, frozen in a moment of happiness. It was a reminder of what we had lost, but also of what we still had: each other. Holding that photo, I realised that while we had lost a house, we hadn't lost our home. Home wasn't just walls and a roof, it was the love and connection we shared. And as long as we held on to that, we could rebuild, no matter how long it took. In the days that followed, life began to regain a sense of normalcy. My parents found temporary work, and I started helping out at the shelter, giving back to those who had given so much to us. Slowly but surely, we began to rebuild our lives. Looking back on that night, I still feel a pang of sorrow for everything we lost. But I also feel a sense of pride. We faced the flames and survived. We lost our house, but we didn't lose hope. And in the end, that hope became the foundation on which we started anew.